I wanted to introduce myself really quickly. My name is Billy Walsh. I'm the Artist Community Manager for SoFar Sounds. And it's an absolute pleasure to be joined by Andrea Stolpe today, one of the instructors at Berklee College of Music Online, who teaches primarily songwriting and will be sharing with us a songwriting workshop today, which is the reason why you're all here. So I'm going to give a brief introduction to Andrea here before I pass things off and cover just a few ground rules so people know how the event will flow. But first, to introduce Andrea, today we'll be listening to Andrea, who is a multi-platinum songwriter, a performing artist, and an educator herself. She has worked as a staff writer for EMI, Almo-Irving, and Universal Music Publishing. Her songs have been recording by artists including Faith Hill, Jimmy Wayne, Julianne Hough, and others. Andrea is also an author and instructor of the course Commercial Songwriting Techniques, part of Berklee Online's songwriting program. We're very privileged here at SoFar Sounds to be able to work with Berklee Online with these kinds of events, Andrea being the first one to join us today for a Berklee Online sponsored event. So thank you to Berklee Online as well. Really quickly, before we go ahead and get started, the ground rules, we will be kicking off the presentation by covering just a few of the questions that were submitted ahead of time. I wanted to thank folks who took a second to fill out the short two-question questionnaire that was sent, just so we have a good understanding of what kind of content and questions you're curious about. Andrew would love to start by just clearing the air and connecting the dots around a few of those questions and how it will pertain to today's presentation. But fear not, if you do have questions that haven't yet been submitted, what we can do is after the presentation is complete, I'll go ahead and hop back on the video chat here, and you might see a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. As questions come up, please feel free to submit those questions via the Q&A function. Avoid submitting questions via the chat function. That's more just for general pleasantries and engagement, but the Q&A function specifically allows myself and our moderators to queue the questions as they come in and filter them so that we know which ones to address when we get to the Q&A section at the end of the call. So that being said, I wanted to kick off the conversation in the chat by just asking people that are arriving today. We've got over 130 participants on the call, which is fantastic. And I want to know, what's one of the main things that you might be struggling with as a songwriter right now? What's getting in your way in terms of writer's block? Just go ahead and shout those things out. We're going to get the conversation going, and we're going to pull up a few of those questions while these answers are coming through the chat for Andrea to go over really quickly. So Andrea, I don't know if you have the sheet up here, but maybe we wanted to go over a few of the questions that were previously submitted.
Yeah, definitely. I don't have the sheet up, but you know what? I can connect with so many of the questions. I've struggled with writer's block in being a writer who lived in Nashville for over a decade and wrote for various publishing companies. You know, you try to be as prolific as you possibly can. And that in and of itself thrust me up against this problem of how do I write the best material I can write as often as I can write it. And so ultimately, it's never enough, right? And so being able to co-write with writers who were farther along, better than me in many attributes, and I'm going to talk about that in the seminar, taught me a lot of things. And then just that process of trying to work through it was where I ended up finding a lot of the tools that I'll share today. And then also quite a lot of the tools come back to process. And so I'm hoping that this webinar is going to give everybody a chance to reflect on your own process so that you can identify where you're getting stuck. And there were so many questions that each portion, each frame that I've prepared today addresses. And I think sometimes it's hard to figure out exactly in what way it addresses it. So I'm going to do my very best to make sure that I connect the dots as much as possible, but I'm very happy to field questions regarding that. How does this melodic idea address my my difficulty setting lyrics to my melodies, or writing
Hmm.
lyrics after I've got the melody done, for example. So that can come from a melody writing difficulty, or a lyric writing difficulty, or so we'll look at all these questions in detail.
Great. Well, I'm really excited to get started, Andrea. I'll go ahead and mute my video so that all eyes are on you for the presentation. And yeah, thank you everybody again for joining. And without further ado, Andrea, I'm going to let you take it away.
Awesome. Thank you. Man, again, such great questions in the chat box that I'm seeing. Um, Much of what I would say writer's block causes is frustration, right? And if I could write a song just by inspiration and never use another tool for the rest of my life, I would do it. No question. I'd rather write by inspiration all the time. But realistically, that's not going to happen. At some point, I need to um, connect what's going on up here and think consciously about writing, because this heart-driven writing, it fades, or it ebbs and flows, cycles. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. So many of these great questions here. Writing alone is hard. The being critical, expressing my authentic voice, being really understanding my artistry versus emulating what's out there. All these things can come back to this idea of writer's block. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this frames that I prepared, because it keeps me focused and makes sure that I hit on all these points that I like to talk about. So here we go. I'm gonna play this little slide here. Okay, here we go. So the first thing I asked myself, of course, what is writer's block? So I went and found a definition. And it kind of made me laugh, because it's a usually temporary condition. And that's kind of funny to me, because when I feel blocked, when I feel like, ah, man, I'm halfway through the song again, and I've run out of ideas, so it feels like it's going to be permanent, right? And we'll go months not feeling like we're moving from a typical sound, grooves, right hand strumming vocabulary that's not taking us anywhere, melodies that just sound like us, lyric concepts that, they are what they are, and we'd like them. We'd like to do things, write about other things, not sound so cliche or cheesy, write about things that are important to us. The list is just really long. So what I'd like to kind of reframe is to look at writer's block as a time during which we're dissatisfied with our typical ideas. Because I think every single one of us knows that we have created something good in the past. Maybe it's not a whole song, maybe it's a piece, or maybe you can say, you know what, I have created a great melody, a great chorus, a lyric in a verse that's really good, and I know it, and I had a feeling that I knew it at the time. So I think everybody can say, um, sometimes I bring something to songwriting that I think is magical or unique. And so when we're feeling writer's block, we're often very critical, and but we can also look at that as growth, because what satisfied me yesterday or 2 months ago is no longer doing it for me. And that indicates growth right there. So it's tough to be patient with that growth. But I want to look at it like that, as we're moving. We're just not sure where to go yet, how to make that leap. So inspiration definitely cycles, right? Starts where inspiration hits, then we write feverishly. And then if you're like me, 15 minutes later, 20 minutes, an hour later, I start to get a little critical. I start to evaluate, what's the quality of this idea? How could I see this fitting into a song? Or I get that shiver like, uh-oh, I'm at the chorus and I still don't know what the title is. I don't know what the point is or whatever the problems are. And then doubt sets in. And I might be trying my very best to avoid looking that doubt in the eye, but I feel it. And eventually I abandon the song. I get up and walk around. You know, I abandon the ideas. Maybe the co-write leaves me with part of a song, this kind of thing. And then every time I take it out again, I try to recapture that inspiration, but I can't get back to that same place that I was in when I was writing it. And there you go. So I have to wait for inspiration to hit again. And so I'm in this cycle of just kind of waiting, not finishing songs, not being able to maintain that level of excitement from the top all the way through to the bottom of the song. So inspiration is like a runaway dog. What it feels like when I'm being led by my inspiration, I'm sort of being dragged behind it. I am worried that it's going to drop me off somewhere and abandon me. But creativity is both inspiration leading me, so it's beautiful moments where I feel like I'm in the flow, but it's also me teaching my inspiration, guiding my inspiration. So that is what the rest of this is going to be about, is specifically in terms of tools and activities I can do every day. What does that look like to guide my inspiration? Okay, so if everybody could take a minute to think about these questions. So these questions will hopefully help you to know your writing, know your style, be able to express what your process is when you write. So when inspiration hits, I start by writing blank. So it could be I start by writing the words. I start by sitting down at my instrument and writing a melody. I start by producing a track. What is that for you? When inspiration hits, I start by writing. I feel most confident when I am writing blank. Is it the chorus? Is it the verse? Is it by writing the concept and I sketch out the outline? You know, when I'm writing with other people. In collaborations, I almost always contribute and then fill in the blank. You know, what do you tend to bring and bring with some level of ease? So whatever your answers are, and you know, certainly it's not going to be clean cut all the time. We start writing songs differently depending on what comes to us, music, lyric, whatever. But these are the tools that you have. So I'd like you to start thinking of these as your strengths. These are the things that you feel most in control of when you write a song. And so reasonably, they guide your process. Okay, so these are things that don't guide your process. I wish I felt as strongly about my blank as my blank, right? So I wish I felt as strongly about my ability to express a groove as the chords that I write. I wish I felt as strongly about my lyrics as my melodies, you know? So think about that. What do you feel like if only I could? You know, in collaborations, I rarely contribute. Maybe there's something that you allow other people to control. Or my inspiration usually runs dry after I have blank. Is that after I have written the chorus, after I've written the verse and chorus? Think about what that is. I feel least confident when I have yet to write so the lyrics. Is it a part of the song? Is it laying down the recording of it? What is it? So these are the tools that, again, don't guide our process, but they're the leftovers. They're what we have to stare at when our strengths have done their job. All right, so here's the three big ideas is we all have a process for writing. And that process is strength driven, which is a good thing, right? And then the third big idea, though, is we can choose our process instead of it choosing us. And so there again, inspiration is it choosing us. And we go to whatever strength-based process we use. And what I'm suggesting then is that that results in the same kind of song. If I always start writing with a chord progression in mind, then my melodies could be a bit of an afterthought and my lyrics a bit of an afterthought. If I start with lyrics, I might end up with a very wordy situation, which affects my melody, which affects my the pacing of my chord progression underneath. So it's almost like any vantage point from which we start leads to the same set of problems. Could look at them as problems, right? Same set of sort of situations to overcome. Okay, so what best describes my process? You might be at a point now where you're recognizing what best describes your process. And you know, no language is wrong here. Just do your best to understand when you feel those strengths coming out, and where those areas where you're afraid to look because you don't feel so confident. All right. So how to change our process, because that really is a huge element in overcoming writer's block. So I'm going to talk about 3 pillars, and each of these pillars, I've separated a song into lyrics as a pillar, melody is another pillar, and then chords and groove being the third pillar. And so I'm going to run through some specific tools within each of these pillars that can help you to change your process. Okay, so let's take that pillar of melody. When we write melody, the thing that we're really trying to write is a motif. So I could look at a verse and say, the melody of this verse is beautiful. It goes, you know, here's the tempo. Da 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 da. Da, 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 da. That could be a 4-line verse, right? Four bits. Now, I could look at that as a glob of verse saying, gosh, how do I write all those notes and rhythms? And that was really cool. Or I could look at it as, wait a second, there's a little bit there that I heard repeated. It was da 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 da. And then there was another little motif. Those are motifs. And in any, I like to drastically just generalize because it makes it easier to say, okay, this is true. There are exceptions, but this is true. Commercial music, which I really kind of define as highly structured, let's say, repetitive songwriting, in which we find the songs very memorable because they give us distinct melodies, a chord progression that repeats. You know, there's not a lot of, let's say, variation at first, at least. So in any section of commercial music that's not so left of center that we have to listen to it 5 times to learn it, we will find there's 1, maybe 2 melodic motifs, but not more, because then the melody becomes so diluted that it's hard to know what the melody is, what it's trying to be. And if I fast forward a little bit to, let's say I write a melody that's very randomized in the lengths of the notes and the pitches, and it's all over, and the shape looks like this, and I've got rest space and phrases ending in unpredictable places, there would be nice ideas there for sure, but there wouldn't be a fingerprint. There's no identity to that melody. So you can imagine how hard it would be then to write a great chorus to come after that, because there's nothing for that verse melody that says, here's what I am. And so, you know, here's what the chorus should be to contrast. And that big word, if you've been writing songs for any length of time, you might have heard contrast is the big idea. And commercial music just absolutely lives and breathes contrast. So this is the idea, is to settle on a motif that you like, and then use repetition of that motif. Because when you do this, then you find a section much more bite-sized. It carries a singular idea, and it makes a lot of that idea. So, and this is a neat thing too, because now you can say, I know how much repetition I want to include in my songwriting. So you can hold up this idea of a motif, or maybe two motifs, and using repetition of it, and then find the right balance for you based on what you enjoy. And now you're no longer just trying to emulate what you hear out there, but you're making an informed decision about what works for you. So below, I've got some shapes that distinguish different melodies. We could rise, we could ascend. So da 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 da, that's rising. Da 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 da, here's falling. And da 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 da. There was a little bit at the end that went up, but it's okay. We're looking for the large picture, right? Generally, it started up here and it went down. What if I do this arc? Da 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 da. That's this shape. What if I start up here and I go down, 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 down? That kind of did that. And again, it's like the basic shape ideas. So you could say, I'm going to try and find examples of this in popular music. And probably you would find these shapes going on. You would find other shapes like da 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 da, which kind of goes between two pitches in sort of a rhythmic little way. But I like to look at these tools as, let me see if I can hold up what I've written through inspiration during that inspired time and see what it did. And now I can say, oh, I know what that is. That's a static melody, like Pink, Try, you know, da 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 da. You know, just one note, it just, you know, poured into you. And it makes sense then, like, I realize that. Now my options to contrast with that shape so I can write a new section to come after it is to not do static, but do one of these other shapes and see what occurs. So again, hopefully this is an example of how you're allowing for inspiration for that time for you to dump all the ideas out. But now use your process here to understand, what did I just make? What was so great about that? And again, limiting a section to just one or maybe two motifs can be super helpful to say, look what I've made, and I know what this is. And so now I know how to make something different for the next section. Should I be, I'm not sure if I should be checking these posts. I'm going to keep going because I have to navigate out of my screen in order to do that. But I'll go back at the end and certainly answer questions. Okay, so here's some more shapes of motifs that we might write. Clustered would be when the notes are really close to each other. Da 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 da, right? I didn't jump a lot around, not like da 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 da. There I had a big interval. I jumped, my pitch jumped. And so that can be a defining characteristic of a motif, so that in the next section, I don't do that. I'll do something more clustered than I did before. Another way we can look at what have I done with my melody, or what can I do if I'm trying to do something different than is my typical style. Do I notice if I often sing the chord tone, or what if I start the notes after the in between? So if my chords are doing da 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 da, I'm playing an F major here, but I sang the G that's in between. So I can sing da 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 da, or I can sing on the chord tones da 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 da. So I'm going to get different ideas based on what note I start my melody on. Not to mention prosody. If I, yesterday, love was such an, yesterday, rather than starting on the chord tone where it's all resolved and closed, yesterday makes me think, I'm nostalgic about yesterday. Something's a little off yesterday. I'm uncertain about yesterday. And consequently, the rest of that song, Beatles song, expresses that what happened yesterday was painful. So there's a lot of meaning that goes into the notes that we sing and the shapes that we sing. In the end, they convey the body language of the lyric that we're saying. And I think that when we're in the flow, when we're really feeling inspired and man, it's working, we got a section, we're thrilled with some of those lines, or the section of the way the groove interacts with our melody and the lyrical message, we're getting prosody. And it's coming as a natural result of who we are and how we write. And in those times then, when we're not feeling inspired, it's hard to manipulate or to produce prosody just intellectually. And so again, looking at these different tools, you could ask yourself, am I going to get better prosody if I start off of the chord tone? Could I get prosody by a melody where all the notes are close together? Or what if I jump as I'm saying something in my lyric? What if I jump pitches when I say something that's a little stark, or a little painful or important, and I want to make a big deal about that lyrical moment. So let's go on. Tip 3. Here's a few more. These are rhythmic ideas with regard to our melody, the motif, that little bit that we're trying to write, whereas the past 2 slides were pitch. So now this is rhythm. I could do a constant line. So in this chicken scratch you see here, this is how I sometimes notate when I'm too lazy to use staff paper. But it's also a great idea to just remove okay, don't worry about the pitches. The individual pitches that they are is not important. It's the shapes that I'm looking for. And so this constant, there's no rest space. This is a long phrase. It's like da 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 da. That's a long phrase. Da 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 da. But this is short phrases. All you got to do to get broken is put some rest space in there. Da 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 da. Right? So Beatles again. Da 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 da. Long phrase. The chorus is da 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 da. Right? So long phrase, short phrase. In that song, it's not pitch that makes the contrast between these 2 sections. It's entirely rhythm. Long phrase, short phrases. Contrast again. So that's the same example here for the long phrase and short phrase. You could think of it in terms of a constant or broken or long phrase, short phrase. Other things that we can do rhythmically, we can lengthen our notes or we can shorten our notes. Again, I'm not worried about all the theory in the world. If you think that way and theory is helpful to you, then by all means do it. But sometimes I think just looking at the bigger picture is helpful, where using longer notes in the chorus, where I've used much shorter notes in the verse. And again, it's the characterization of it. It's not that I can't use a long note in the verse. It's just that I want it to be characterized more by the short notes if I'm going to characterize the chorus more by long notes right away in the section. So that's a beautiful contrasting tool. And then the last one is before, on, or after. So the vertical line is the bar line. And so in that first example at the bottom left is da 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 da. That's how that looks, where da da one. If I want to create contrast between sections, or rather come up with a new idea melodically, I'm going to think, oh yeah, I can do on instead of before. And that sounds like da 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 da. Or I can do after, one, da 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 da, right? So I have options. And again, if you listen to a lot of songs that you love, you will notice that this is a really popular tool to have most of your melodic motifs in the verse start, let's say, before. And then in the chorus, start after. And it really only matters what you do right away in the contrasting section. That's going to create the contrast. So those are some rhythmic tools. And again, it's a matter of, you can take these frames and just print them out and put them by your writing area, and just know that these are pieces that make up your melodies that you can look at to recall what you can do differently to change your process. Okay, so let's go into that second pillar, harmony and groove. I mean, obvious tip, right? And we all do it. Steal a groove from someone else, from another song. We're all influenced, whether we would like to admit it or not. We're writing because of the music that we've listened to our whole lives. So doing it consciously, I think, is no worse. So stealing a groove. Sometimes the way I like to do this too is I'll put on a song in the background that I really want to emulate and I'm inspired by. And I'll let the energy of that groove help me to generate lyric ideas. So I'll just stream of consciousness writing over that music in the background. Or I will literally take a strumming pattern from a song and learn it, or a blues progression. Oh yeah, I haven't written anything like that. So I'm gonna give myself that free ticket to writing a song. Whether or not we want to admit it, we all write with a parameter in mind. So what I mean is, whether you consciously choose the groove, the strumming pattern, the chord progression, the melody, the lyric concept, you're getting it from somewhere. And you're giving yourself a parameter there with that thing that you choose. It can be as simple as sitting down with a guitar and playing the first chord. The first chord establishes, might establish the key. You're beginning to establish the groove. And if you play 2 chords, 3 chords, you're establishing the tempo, the key, the progression. You might even be establishing, if you don't think about it, the portion, the part of your range vocally that you're singing in. So we make so many decisions within the first few minutes of writing a song that then close off doors and say, I'm writing this kind of song. So thinking about what those decisions are when you sit down thinking, you know what, I'm going to set the metronome to 75 beats per minute and try this exact same groove that I've stolen over that tempo. Now What does my title seem to mean? You know, so we're gonna use the tools to change the process. So tip 5 is changing the tempo of that groove. So 72, 120, 160, just pick it at random. You might feel the groove takes on a really different character and wants to change a little bit as you speed it up or slow it down. Brings new ideas to mind. But this can be a great way to write if you're used to writing with melody first or lyric first. Don't let your chords and your groove be an afterthought. Let them drive the process for a bit. You could hawk an entire chord progression from a song. You know, if it's like most popular songs, we wouldn't know that chord progression from another popular song. You know, many use the same ones. You could reorder them and see what you get. So steal a chord progression. Here I've written in Nashville number system. None of the chords here are non-diatonic. They all belong to the same key. So I'm sure I wasn't thinking of a particular song in mind, but I'm absolutely certain that these chords are part of many, many songs and might even be the exact chord progression of some songs that I could drum up. So again, the way I write these down is just to show one chord per measure. Looks like in this 6 minor 4 5 5, they all take a measure to play. Maybe this is a whole verse section. Maybe it's a verse and a chorus. Maybe it's a verse and a pre-chorus. But stealing a chord progression is helpful. Sometimes when we do this, it can be a tendency to then want to sing their melody, and it's hard to divorce ourselves from what they're doing. Change the groove, change the strumming pattern, play it on piano if you heard it on guitar. Give yourself a drum track that is maybe at the same tempo, but a different feel. So another way to change the groove. Okay, so in terms of chords, I find that many of us think, oh, I just got to learn new chords. But there are so many things we can do without adding new chords to our vocabulary. So we can do one of these two things. We can stretch or shrink the chord progression. So if the original progression is 6 minor, 4 major, 5 major, 5 major. So in, let's take the guitar key. Let's say I'm in G. The progression would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Here's the 5 major, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. So it was E minor to C major to D major, D major. So that's my original progression. I could stretch that out for a section and say, I'm going to stay on the 6 minor twice as long. And now I'm going to feel something very different from this chord progression. I'll speed up the tempo. So if it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 3, 4. So I'm kind of just taking that as inspiration, the original. So the opposite I can do too. I can shrink the progression. So I get 1, 2, 4. Right? So it moves along a little quicker. The neat thing here is that between sections, we can do this kind of stretching and shrinking and wind up with really awesome contrast between the sections. So I'm going to show you that actually. Well, maybe, I don't know if I can play examples of songs, or if we're going to get into trickiness with that. But John Mayer Daughters does this, where pretty much, with the exception of a borrowed chord in the chorus, the same chord progression for the verse and the chorus, and all he does is change chords twice as often is in the chorus as he did in the verse. That song is in 6/8, so you could say, all right, I'm going to use 4/4, just so I don't hear daughters in the back of my mind. I'm going to change chords once per measure, just like he did. I'm going to have a 4-chord progression, and then I'm going to try in the chorus changing chords twice per measure. When we change chords more frequently, it immediately puts energy into the section, so we feel the section moving more quickly. When we change chords less frequently, it sometimes can create a slowing, like a lethargic feeling that we might not like, or it can create kind of an expansiveness that's like, oh, this is the main message right here. So you kind of play around with it, but that's the body language again. That's the emotion that you can't verbalize when it comes to a song and what it's trying to do. But play around with those tips. You don't even have to learn new chords. You could play Tom Petty's entire catalog, by doing these types of things, which I think is amazing. If you do want to try and involve more chords, borrow a chord, right? Now, John Mayer knows every chord in the book. And yet, when he writes songs, he doesn't use all of them at the same time. So, we should take our lessons from these masters. So what you can do is write your typical boring chord progression. Write that 6 minor 4 1 5 thing. Allow yourself to do it. And then say, well, could I take that subdominant and swap it out for a 2 major instead of a 2 minor? Could I take the 3 minor, which would be diatonic to my key, and make it a major? So a really wise producer once told me that tip, and some of these things are so obvious, like, why didn't I think of that? But to find a borrowed chord, take what would be a major in the key, like 4 major, and make it a minor. Flip it over to be its opposite, let's say. To find the borrowed chord in a major key, the 2 minor is diatonic to the key. It's not borrowed, it belongs there. Make it a 2 major. Suddenly it's borrowed. And so those borrowed chords are moments. They're not to be used in excess, because they draw attention to that moment in the song. So you'll find that these borrowed chords can be awesome right before a new section comes. So many times we'll hear the 2 major at the end of the pre-chorus. I can break away out of the darkness and into the sun. So it's Kelly Clarkson's Breakaway. There's that big 2 major right before we go into the chorus. But these things can really make, I feel in control of my chord progressions more when I know I am keeping my progression static. So, I'm laying a foundation with my 6 minor 4 1 5, but it's not all I've got. You don't want to lay your bag of tricks out on the table for the listener in the first 8 bars of your song. You're going to use these devices like a borrowed chord in a way that helps you to express lyrically your message. And I think that's ultimately gets back to this idea of prosody. How am I using my chords, my melodic shape, my lyric concept with intention? Yeah. Okay. So something that I don't do very often. I'm a piano player, not much of a guitar player, but it's fun to sit down with guitar sometimes and try to emulate a riff. Some songs here that start with a riff. It's a neat way to create maybe like a 1 bar or 2 bar or one chord or two chord groove where that riff is kind of like a harmonic hook, right? That's already establishing that the instrumental of your song carries some importance. It's not just the background to all of your lyrics that you're stuffing into the song. So it's a neat way to, again, change the process. Okay, now we get into that third pillar, lyrics. Oh, lyrics, such a pain. Lyrics are hard to write. And luckily, I moved to Nashville early on in right after Berklee, and hit lyrics head on. And I think had I not done that, I would still fear them today. But, you know, the first thing that we can do to make lyric writing easier, not such a monster in our writing life, is to free write. Get really comfortable free writing. You might know this as object writing, destination writing, if you've read my book, Popular Lyric Writing. The whole idea is just to write with your senses. So we call it sensory writing. So what this means is you might end up with a paragraph. I like to walk and dictate into my phone. When I have an idea, I'll just start to list off things that I'm seeing in my mind, images, taste, touch, sound, sight, smell, movement around that concept. So it's not rhymed. It's nothing that you pre-plan. It is something that you would say, I'm going to take 6 minutes or so, 5-6 minutes every morning, evening, whenever you want to do it. I do it when I feel inspired to do it. And I'm just going to write. And be prepared for weeks at a time of the writing to feel sort of similar at times. Again, that's that writer's block. I'm in this phase, I'm plateauing right here. And then one day, my ideas are going to go further, and I'm going to write about a concept I hadn't yet kind of touched on, or phrases are going to come out that are interesting to me. So definitely pick up some sensory writing. Anybody who's a creative writing major or experience with writing in general is going to know in novels, people who write fiction in particular, there's a lot of this kind of language. It's what connects us to the scene. So we're telling who, when, and where, and we're painting the scene for our listener. Tons of songs have examples of this. I pull up the collar on my favorite winter coat. This wind is blowing my mind. I see the kids in the street with not enough to eat. Who am I? Then it's just thought, feeling language. But all that beginning of Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror is showing me. And that's where this free writing pays off. It shows rather than tells. So now I know how the singer feels. I know a lot about the singer's character, what the singer notices and cares about. So it's a beautiful way to develop our lyric writing in that manner. Okay, writing through a lens. So there were several questions about how do I sound authentic when I write? Getting back to sensory language, how do I write about love in an interesting way? Not the back when we met, kind of a thing. Or, describing the color of someone's eyes yet again. So this is a great tool for that. What it is you're going to write about a concept, write about a song idea you have. So I could write about how I just want to get away. It's all too much. I'm stressed out. I need to get away. That's the concept. And you notice there's no sensory language there. It's a big idea. It's the message. It's the concept. I just want to get away. And I'm going to choose now an object to write about getting away through. So maybe I'll use an object like, I'm just drumming this up on the fly, a Volkswagen Beetle. Okay, Volkswagen Beetles to me are kind of fun. So now that getting away, if I write about it through the lens of, oh, that muffler, that sound when the engine starts up, and you never know if it's going to keep going, but it does, and it's 40 years old, and it's rusted along the I don't know, car parts. Anyway, it's this fun little Volkswagen, and I'm bumping through through the countryside, and I'm putting distance between me and everything behind me. So I'm going to do my sensory writing through the lens of that Volkswagen Beetle about getting away and leaving the stress behind. And in that song, that Beetle was kind of fun. And so it's less about the stress and it's more about what I expect to feel when I get away, the possibility of getting away. Now, let's say I wrote about about wanting to get away and just needing to get away through a tornado, choosing a different object. Man, that's tumultuous. Everything in my life is being picked up and swirled around, and the rain comes in sheaths, and it's there's a sickening green sky and this mood that's over everything I do. So that tornado now is kind of focusing my lens on the challenge of getting away. That doesn't mean that at some point, maybe in the second verse, I can talk about how great it's going to feel. But I think that tornado led me to the whirling, the freight train that is my job. You know what I'm saying? So you might feel like, oh, that's like writing through a metaphor. Yeah, only you keep the metaphor the same throughout the song. Yeah, a really, really cool way to write, particularly if you want to write a happy song. For example, the song Happy, Pharrell Williams. He mentions a hot air balloon, a room without a roof. He mentions things that are high. It feels good to be happy. You feel high. But instead of him telling me how it feels, which eventually he does, because that's what a chorus does in certain areas of the verse, he shows me. And that makes the bulk of the quality of the song. And in that song, he does go back in the second verse, the verse after the first chorus is done, which is problematic for many of us writers. You could talk about the flip side. So if he's been talking about how great it feels to be high, how great it feels to, I'm a hot air balloon, I'm a room without a roof, I'm all these things. Oh, I know problems are going to come. So he flipped the idea. Instead of the first verse, whatever you talk about in the first verse, how great that is, look at the underside of the underbelly of that. Think, can I mention that? In the tornado song, first verse is all about the whirl and man, it's challenging. The second verse is all about, or maybe just starts with, someday these blue skies, man, I can almost taste them in the distance. But for now, that challenge of the tornado is just whirring through my life. So that's a really nice technique to use to generate lyric. I'm going to check my time here because I'm taking a lot longer than I should. Billy, shall I rush through these last ones?
Hey, yeah, I was just about to say, actually, we have the opportunity to take a little extra time afterwards to
Okay.
make sure that we finish the presentation. So anybody who has to go right at the hour, just know that we will share this recording. However, we would love for you to stay and finish the presentation. And if possible, we'll try and take a few questions offline. If Andrea has additional time to answer any questions offline, we'll try and coordinate something so that people get their questions answered directly, even though we may not have time for Q&A at the end. But I would love to finish the presentation if that's okay with you, Andrea.
Totally. I'm so sorry I didn't pay attention to time. I just kind of go off on my tangents here.
That's okay. Everybody's rooting you on to keep going. So we're looking really good. I'll let you get back to it.
Great. Tip 12, writing from a title. So this is very similar to writing through a lens, but you choose a title. Let's say my title is Sweet Thing. I'm going to make a list of everything that I relate to Sweet Thing. So again, I might take a walk and just dictate words like objects, nouns, verbs, spun, all these kinds of things that are related to sweet thing. And then I might outline the song. Verse 1, what it feels to be like to be with you. And I might say it's cotton candy, it's sugar, it's spinning on a carousel, it's all these things. And then the chorus is, you're my sweet thing. Verse 2, what it feels like when you're away. There's those opposites again, right? You're here in the first verse. What about when you're not? Because you're my sweet thing. And then the bridge, I just can't get enough of that sweet thing. Tip 13, steal a rhyme scheme. So old and boring, A, B, A, B, but new and exciting. I'm going to take my A, B, A, B, and I'm going to say, let me take that last line, and I'm going to shorten and repeat. So usually it's the last line we can mess with. This is going to change your melody, but look at your rhyme schemes and just say, what if I didn't rhyme at all? What if I rhyme my last 2 lines instead of lines 2 and 4? So get creative that way. I don't know how many times I make it harder than it needs to be, but so many songs just repeat a title or have 1 or 2 developmental lines in between, but good grief, I can make it hard. So simplifying is a beautiful thing. Changing the point of view. I know there were some questions about this. This is a huge, huge topic and one well worth, lots of talks. But try changing the point of view in what you've written when you feel blocked. So if you started with I this, I that, first person, try third person narrative or try direct address. And you might find that it unblocks you because what was happening to me, myself, now I'm on the outside and I'm saying it's happening to you. And now I have different ideas about where that song could go. Okay, so this is the laundry list of tips. I can write to a track or a drum loop, and we kind of already talked about that. I can write with or without an instrument. Even if you play, if you don't have your instrument in your hand, you're going to think differently. Collaboration, definitely worth the time. Good collaboration. Sometimes it takes a while to find a few of those, but that inevitably changes our process. Writing a lot of songs in small bits. I find that I lose my objectivity after a half an hour, maybe, let's say. And so saying, all right, I'm going to write for 15 minutes on this, and then I'm going to put it aside. I'm going to look at that song I was writing on last week, and I have ideas on it right away because I can see it as the objective, as an observer would. It's not perfect, but I'm going to go by my first impression too. And then the last one, you got to have a good enough attitude. This is no space for perfectionism. You'll never finish anything. So 90% of what we write is not our best 10%. Still, you got to move on, keep going. So good enough attitude, finish things, allow yourself to write that cliche and keep going. Our favorite artists do it most of the time. We can too. So that is my little bit on writing, overcoming writer's block.
Fantastic. Andrea, thank you so much for sharing with us. And thank you for being willing to go a little bit over time here just to finish up. The chat is exploding with gratitude and very much responding to a lot of these tips as things that may have been obvious now that you hear it from somebody who's had the experience you've had, but might not necessarily be something that really comes into your consciousness until you're taught. So just such a wonderful thing to walk away with. I too have taken so much away for my next go at songwriting and really appreciate you taking the time